Most people think Beagles are just dramatic. Too loud. Too clingy. Too obsessed with food. The kind of dog that cries when you leave the room, then forgives you 30 seconds later with a wagging tail and hopeful eyes. But for a lot of owners, something stranger starts happening over time. A quiet guilt. The kind you can't really explain to other people. Because on the surface, everything looks fine. The walks happen. The treats happen. The cuddles happen. Your beagle looks loved. And yet, some moments feel unexpectedly heavy. Like when they follow you from room to room in complete silence. Or when they're sleeping peacefully, until you stand up. Then instantly, they wake up too. Watching. Waiting. As if your disappearance is something they're constantly preparing for. And that's when the uncomfortable thought starts creeping in. What if your beagle's happiest moments are also the moments teaching them you'll eventually leave? Not because you're a bad owner. Not because you neglected them. But because the deeper your bond becomes, the more emotionally dependent they quietly become too. And most owners never realize they're creating the dependency while they're simply trying to love them. Because this behavior didn't start in your home. It started long before beagles ever became pets. And to understand why this guilt feels so personal, you have to understand what a beagle was emotionally designed to survive. For centuries, beagles were never expected to face the world alone. They were bred to move in groups, sleep in groups, hunt in groups. Everything about their psychology was built around constant proximity. The sound of paws nearby. The scent of familiar bodies. The rhythm of shared movement through forests and open land. A beagle's job was never independence. It was synchronization. They worked as cooperative scent hounds, tracking trails together for hours at a time while staying emotionally connected to both the pack and the handler guiding them forward. That connection wasn't optional. It was survival. And over generations, that dependency became deeply embedded into the breed itself. Even today, you can still see it. The way a beagle constantly checks where you are. The way they follow footsteps instead of destinations. The way they seem calm only when someone else exists within their emotional radar. Because to a beagle, closeness doesn't just feel comforting. It feels correct. And that's where modern life creates a strange psychological collision. Most beagles now live in quiet homes, separated from the constant social environment their nervous systems were originally shaped around. The average day isn't filled with coordinated movement or pack activity anymore. It's empty rooms. Closed doors. Long stretches of emotional stillness while the humans they orbit disappear into work, school, errands, routines. And many owners never notice what that absence actually does to them. Because beagles don't always express stress in dramatic ways at first. Sometimes it looks harmless. Waiting near the door. Sleeping excessively. Shadowing their owner from room to room. Whining for a few seconds after someone leaves. Owners laugh about it. He's just attached. She's being needy. That's just how beagles are. But beneath those small behaviors is something much deeper. A breed whose emotional wiring still expects connection almost constantly, trying to adapt to long periods of separation it was never truly designed for. And that's where the guilt quietly begins, because the behaviors most owners laugh at are often emotional alarms. It usually starts with behaviors people call adorable. The beagle that follows you into the bathroom. The one that refuses to nap unless your feet are within sight. The dramatic howling when a bedroom door closes for 5 minutes. Online, these moments become jokes. Memes. Proof of how loving the breed is. And in many ways, they are. But they can also reveal something far more emotionally complicated. Because beagles are unusually sensitive to patterns connected to separation. Not just absence itself. The warning signs before it happens. The sound of keys touching the table. A jacket being picked up. Shoes sliding across the floor. To most dogs, these are ordinary events. To many beagles, they become emotional countdowns. You can actually watch the shift happen in real time. Their body stiffens slightly. Their eyes lock onto movement. Suddenly they're following closer than before, as if staying near you might somehow stop what they already sense is coming. And owners often respond with reassurance. Extra petting. Baby talk. One last cuddle before leaving. Without realizing it, they're accidentally strengthening the emotional association even more. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement. Small, unpredictable bursts of affection that deepen attachment patterns over time. And beagles respond to it intensely. Because unlike more independent breeds, beagles rarely want emotional distance. Their nervous systems are highly social, highly reactive, and deeply reward-oriented. If companionship becomes the center of emotional security, they will keep chasing it constantly. Sometimes through closeness. Sometimes through noise. And sometimes through food. That endless hunger beagles are famous for isn't always just appetite. For many dogs, food becomes stimulation in an otherwise emotionally underactive environment. Something exciting. Something regulating. Something predictable when connection disappears. Even excessive sleeping can be misunderstood. Owners assume their beagle simply relaxes while they're gone. But in many cases, long sleep periods are responses to emotional inactivity and understimulation, a way for the brain to pass time until connection returns. And slowly, owners get trapped in a cycle they never intended to create. The guilt of leaving makes them give more reassurance. The reassurance deepens the attachment. The attachment increases the distress. This creates even more guilt the next time they leave. And the hardest part is, most owners secretly love being needed. Until one specific moment makes them realize just how deep that need actually goes. And once that moment happens, it becomes impossible to unsee. For a lot of owners, the realization doesn't happen in person. It happens through a screen. A security camera. A pet monitor. An old phone recording they checked out of curiosity and immediately wished they hadn't. Because the dog they leave behind often looks completely different from the dog they come home to. Before departure, everything seems normal. Maybe the beagle follows them around a little more than usual. Maybe there's some whining when the shoes come on. But eventually the owner leaves, the door closes, and the assumption is simple. They'll settle down in a minute. But then the footage starts playing. And suddenly, the silence inside the house feels unbearable. The pacing starts almost immediately. Back and forth. Room to room. Door to window. Window to hallway. Some beagles howl. Some sit completely still, staring at the entrance for long stretches of time as if trying to process why the person they emotionally depend on vanished without explanation. Others can't settle at all. They jump onto furniture. Sniff obsessively. Circle repeatedly. Lie down for 30 seconds only to stand back up again. And what breaks owners emotionally isn't just the behavior itself. It's the contrast. Because the moment the owner returns home, most of that distress disappears almost instantly. The tail starts wagging again. The excitement returns. The beagle looks normal. Which means many owners never realize how much emotional strain existed in the hours between those two moments. Beagles are remarkably good at masking the aftermath once connection is restored. And that creates a kind of invisible suffering. The owner sees happiness. The camera saw panic. And suddenly a painful thought starts echoing in the back of their mind. I give my dog a good life, so why does it hurt so much to watch them without me? That question stays with people. Because once you've seen your dog emotionally unravel in your absence, you can't fully go back to the comforting version of the story you had before. And strangely, the guilt only gets heavier for the people who love their beagle the most. The most painful part of this cycle is that it usually comes from love. Not neglect. Not cruelty. Love. The owners who bond hardest with their beagle are often the ones trying most desperately to make them feel safe. So every whine gets comforted. Every anxious moment gets softened with affection, treats, attention, reassurance. And at first, it feels beautiful. The dog becomes deeply attached, deeply loyal, deeply connected. They look at their owner like the center of the universe. Because in many ways, they are. But attachment is shaped by repetition. Every emotional response teaches the nervous system what to expect next. If anxiety always leads to comfort, the anxiety itself can quietly become reinforced. Not intentionally. Not maliciously. Just emotionally. A beagle starts learning that closeness is the solution to discomfort. Presence becomes regulation. Absence becomes instability. And over time, they become hyper-tuned to the smallest changes in their owner's behavior. The shift in footsteps. The direction someone walks through the house. The sound of a zipper. A hand reaching for keys. Their brain begins scanning constantly for signs of separation before separation even happens. And humans unknowingly deepen it because we instinctively interpret that attachment through our own emotions. We anthropomorphize it. We see a dog crying at the door and think, "He loves me so much." We see them panic when we leave and interpret it as devotion. Sometimes it is devotion. But sometimes it's dependency layered so deeply into emotional routine that the dog no longer knows how to regulate calmly without the person they've attached themselves to. And modern life intensified this dramatically. Especially during the pandemic. Millions of dogs suddenly experienced near-constant human presence for months or years. Owners worked from home. Routines disappeared. Beagles adapted quickly, because emotionally, constant proximity already aligned with what their instincts preferred. Then the world reopened. Humans left again. And for many dogs, the separation felt abrupt and incomprehensible. That's why so many owners describe the guilt in such personal terms. Because eventually, a terrifying realization begins forming underneath all the affection. My beagle trusts me completely, and that trust may be exactly why being alone hurts them so much. And once that thought settles in, the emotional weight shifts. The hardest part isn't the barking, or the destruction, or even the crying. It's what owners slowly begin feeling about themselves. At some point, the guilt stops being about the dog alone. It starts changing the owner too. Slowly. Quietly. In ways most people never talk about out loud. Some beagle owners begin feeling guilty for leaving the house at all. Not for days. Not for weeks. For hours. A simple grocery trip suddenly carries emotional weight. Dinner with friends feels harder to enjoy. Vacations become emotionally complicated before they even begin. Because somewhere in the back of their mind, they're picturing the dog waiting near the door. Listening. Wondering. And over time, people start adjusting their entire lives around avoiding that feeling. They rush errands just to get back faster. They skip social plans. They check cameras obsessively. They apologize to the dog before leaving the house. Sometimes jokingly. Sometimes not. And the strangest part is that from the outside, none of this looks serious. People see a loved pet. A close bond. A devoted owner. What they don't see is the exhaustion that can quietly grow underneath constant emotional responsibility. Because loving a deeply attached dog can become psychologically heavy in ways owners never expected. Especially when the attachment becomes emotionally one-sided in intensity. The dog depends on the owner for regulation. The owner begins organizing life around managing the dog's emotional state. And eventually, many people reach a thought that instantly makes them feel ashamed. I love my dog completely, but sometimes this feels overwhelming. That thought terrifies people because it clashes with the identity they want to have. Good owners aren't supposed to feel trapped. They aren't supposed to need breaks from something they love. But emotional fatigue doesn't mean love disappeared. Psychologists sometimes describe this as compassion fatigue, when constant caregiving slowly drains emotional energy faster than it can fully recover. It doesn't happen because someone is selfish. It happens because emotional vigilance is exhausting. Especially when nobody talks honestly about it. Non-dog owners often don't understand the depth of the bond, so many Beagle owners keep these feelings private. The guilt itself becomes shameful. Admitting exhaustion feels disloyal somehow. So they stay silent. They keep loving. Keep reassuring. Keep carrying the emotional weight quietly by themselves. And yet, hidden underneath all that guilt is something strangely beautiful. The guilt exists for one reason. Because the bond is real. That heavy feeling Beagle owners carry isn't proof they're failing. It's proof they've finally recognized the emotional weight of being trusted so completely by another living creature. And once you understand that, something begins to soften. Because dogs are not measuring love through perfection. They are not keeping score of every hour you're gone. Every mistake. Every imperfect routine. What they search for is something much simpler. Safety. Predictability. Connection. Emotional security is not built from constant presence. It's built from consistency. From teaching a dog that closeness exists, but separation is survivable too. That's why the healthiest Beagle relationships are never built on endless reassurance alone. They're built on balance. Affection, but also structure. Love, but also emotional resilience. Small moments of independence matter more than many owners realize. A calm departure. Time spent alone without panic. Predictable routines that teach the nervous system not every absence is abandonment. And strangely, when owners stop seeing themselves as the center of their dog's emotional survival, the relationship often becomes healthier for both of them. Because this was never supposed to be ownership in the emotional sense. It's stewardship. Being trusted with a nervous system that feels deeply, attaches deeply, and experiences connection with unusual intensity. That responsibility can feel heavy sometimes. But it's also extraordinarily rare. A Beagle's attachment is not weakness. It's vulnerability without defenses. Pure trust offered with almost no emotional protection at all. And maybe that's why the guilt hurts so much in the first place. Because deep down, owners eventually realize they were never just taking care of a dog. They were shaping the emotional world of something that loved them completely. But there's still one final truth most Beagle owners eventually realize. One day, almost every Beagle owner realizes something that stays with them forever. While humans divided their lives between work, stress, routines, ambitions, distractions, their dog was doing something much simpler. Waiting. Not because their world was empty. But because, emotionally, their world had a center. And for most Beagles, that center was always the person they loved. That realization hits quietly. Sometimes while watching them sleep. Sometimes when they grow old. Sometimes long after the noisy years are gone. You suddenly understand that while your life kept expanding outward, theirs kept circling back to you. Again and again. And maybe that's why the guilt never fully disappears. Loving a Beagle means carrying an emotional responsibility most people never even realize exists. And the guilt so many owners feel doesn't come from failure. It comes from caring deeply enough to finally see the weight of the bond. But this was never about becoming a perfect owner. It was about awareness. About understanding that behind the noise, the stubbornness, the clinginess, and the constant need for closeness, there was always a dog trying to stay emotionally connected to the person they trusted most. So tonight, maybe look at your Beagle a little differently. And if there was ever a moment that made you realize just how emotionally attached they truly were, share it below. Because for many owners, that realization changes everything. Some dogs live beside us. Beagles, emotionally live inside us.